All right, today's lesson is going to be about it's how God is with us, how He will watch over us, and He will not leave us. I wanted to emphasize the Joseph story, that this was a theme already very early on, that people that do walk with God is going to be their blessing. God is never going to leave them. God is going to be with them, and God is going to watch over them. So what a promise! But it's not just isolated. It's not just the one time that it was spoken. Initially, we picked up on how God says these things to Jacob. He says, "Look, this is Genesis 28, verse 15. Look, I'm with you, and I'll watch over you wherever you go." What a promise! I'm going to be with you, and I'll watch over you wherever you go. And I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you. God is making a promise to Jacob that He will not leave Jacob until I have done what I promised you. And I feel like God has made a lot of promises to us as well. And where sometimes we see Jesus making these big promises, and we're still waiting for those promises to come true in our own lives. And I really want all of them to come true in my own life. But God has said that to Jacob. And that we see in Joseph's life how it has come true. So we're going to pick up on Genesis chapter 45. You guys know the story, how Joseph was sold into slavery. He's in Egypt. He spent nearly more than a decade as a slave / in dungeon. Then Pharaoh puts him in charge of all of Egypt, because there's going to be a famine come in, and he stores all the food for the time of famine. And now the Bible says this famine was severe in all of the world, and now the people from the nearby countries are coming to Egypt to get their food, to grain, because Joseph has had the foresight to store all these food. And now people from Canaan, his family, is starving, and now they're coming. And I won't go into the details. It's in the previous chapters if you guys want to read it. But obviously, Genesis chapter 45, verse 1, I'm going to start reading. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those stood by him, and he cried, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were terrified at his presence. I'll pause there a little bit. Man, Joseph is revealing himself to his brothers. Remember, his brothers initially wanted to kill him. When he was approaching them early on, they wanted to kill him, number one. Because of Reuben, they decided they're going to throw him to a well instead of kill him right away, because they just didn't want to see him die. And then later on, they've decided, because of Judah, that they're going to sell him into slavery so that he will never be seen again. And now the brothers, when they see their brother Joseph standing in a place of power, has the power to repay them back, they're terrified. And so they should be. Verse 4, so Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, I beg you." And they came near. He said, "I'm your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and keep you alive. For you, many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. And here is Joseph tells 3 times. Verse 5, toward the end of it, it says, actually, verse 5, it says, and now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me here before you to preserve life. And verse 7, and God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep you alive, for you many survivors. And verse 8, for it was not you who sent me, but God. 3 times he's telling his brothers that it wasn't them, but it was God who sent them to Egypt. I was thinking about it. He also gives us reasons. He says to preserve, it's in verse 7, and God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep you alive, for you many survivors. I was thinking about that. If you think about this, if Joseph wasn't in Egypt, there'll be no Israel. Have you ever thought about it? There'll be no descendants of Israel if it wasn't for Joseph to preserve them, just like he says it. There'll be no race of Israel at all. They'll all perish. And Joseph is emphasizing that it was God who sent him ahead to Pharaoh, to Egypt, with the goal that God was trying to preserve their lineage, basically, through Joseph's presence in Egypt. There'll be no Israel. And he says in verse 8, so it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and the lord of all his house, and the ruler over all the land of Egypt. I was also thinking about that. So he sent me, I see 2 purposes. Number 1, that God sent me here to save your race, basically. And the second, he has raised me up to be a father to Pharaoh. It's like God is showing us that God will raise the lowly and exalt. Let's continue on verse 9. Make haste and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you. For there are yet 5 years of famine to come, lest you and your household and all that you have come to become destitute. And now your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father of all my splendor in Egypt, and of all that you have seen. Make haste and bring my father down here. Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them, and all that his brothers talked with him. Verse 16, when the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brother have come, it pleased Pharaoh and his servants well. Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load your beasts and go back to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households and come to me, and I'll give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. Command them also, do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Give no thoughts to your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. The sons of Israel did this, And Joseph gave them wagons, according to the command of Pharaoh, gave them provision for the journey. To each and all of them he gave festal garments, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 festal garments. To his father he sent as follows: 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, 10 she-donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and provision for his father on the journey. Then he sent his brothers away. As they departed, he said to them, "Do not quarrel on the way." So they went out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan, to their father Jacob. They told him, "Joseph is still alive, and he is a ruler over all the land of Egypt." And his heart fainted, for he did not believe them. When they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, and when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of the father Jacob revived. And Israel said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive, and I'll go and see him before I die." I want you to notice that Jacob, who has grieved for the death of his son, Joseph, so he was 17 when he departed, or approximately, maybe it was sometime after. Now Joseph is, so there were 13 years he was as a slave and as in the dungeon. 7 years he was serving Pharaoh, time of plenty. So he's now 20 years have elapsed, and now this is the second year into the famine. So 22 years Joseph has not seen his son. Jacob did not see his son. And he was grieving, apparently, on and off for his son for this long. It says the spirit of their father Jacob revived. I thought of that. What does that mean? That their father's spirit revived. I'll pin this thought. I think as we read it, it just becomes a little bit more clear. Let's go to chapter 46, verse 1. We'll read another couple of verses and then we'll talk. So Israel took his journey with all that he had, came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here am I." Then he said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will there make of you a great nation. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again. And Joseph's hand shall close your eyes." So as Jacob starts traveling down to Egypt, he gets to a place, to Beersheba, and he offers some sacrifices to God. And God, in a vision, talks to Jacob. He calls him Jacob, Jacob, right? And Jacob replies, "Here I am." God promises that, verse 4, "I will go down with you to Egypt, and I also will bring you up again." You guys remember, it's the promise that was given to Jacob early on in Genesis 28, where we started reading. Look, I'm with you. I'll watch over you. I'll not leave you. He's still telling the same thing to Jacob. I'll go down with you, but I'll come up with you. I will not leave you. I'm with you. I'll watch over you. But if that is so, one would ask, wouldn't Jacob have a problem with what took place with Joseph? Doesn't Jacob have any qualms with God? That for 22 years, he thought that his son was dead. He grieved over it. Plus, didn't Joseph have any qualm with it, with God? That the best of his youth was spent as a slave and in a dungeon? He says, God sent me here to save your race, right? You didn't do it. God did it. But doesn't he have any beef with God? Have you ever thought about it? Did Jacob have any beef with God, or Joseph had any beef with God? And if you were then, would you have any beef with God? Wouldn't you say, why would you do this? It's 22 years that I have not seen my son, and I've grieved over them. And Jacob and Joseph can say the same thing. Man, my best of my youth has passed. But they don't. Neither one has that grievance. Because when you're walking with God, when you're close to God, when He's your Father, when He's your friend, when you have questions, your God will answer your questions. There are reasons to what God is doing. You're not seeing them yet. You may not quite comprehend them yet. In this case, Joseph becomes the savior for many lives and even the whole race of Israel. But it comes about in a way that is, we consider them unorthodox. And some of us have beef with God. And a lot of us are not in relationship close enough that we can get our answers from God. So we never are settled. Many people are just not settled because they're just not close enough to God to hear and understand His ways and His plans. Jacob has no problems. He doesn't ask, why did you let me suffer so long? Joseph doesn't say the same thing. He doesn't say to God, why did you let me suffer so long? They understand the plans of God. So this is promised to individuals that will walk with God. So if you, these people in the room, choose to walk with God, God will make the same promise to you, that He will be your God and that He will be with you, He will watch over you, and that He will not leave you, ever. Several hundred years later, the promise is also made for Jacob's race, not just to one individual, but the entire race. In Deuteronomy 31, verse 6, Moses is, I think, talking to Joshua, but this is really a general promise to the people of Israel. It says, verse 6, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. This is like right before they're going into Canaan. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, the people that are in the land of Canaan. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Verse 8, the Lord Himself goes before you and will be with you. He would never leave you nor forsake you. Don't be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Same concept being repeated now for the people of Israel. Not just one person like Jacob, not just like Joseph embraced the same faith of his father that God is with me. I don't think Joseph was always close to God. When he was sold into slavery, he was close to God. When he was in the dungeon, he was close to God. And God raised him up in every situation, wherever he went. And all the people that witnessed him, right? Initially the Potiphar and later on the prison guard. Notice that like God was with this guy, that the Spirit of God was in him. He had a relationship with God. Therefore, he prospered. So now God is telling the whole nation of Israel, the group of them, I feel like, why? Because they were the people of God. And who are the people of God today? Anyone who chooses to do His will. Individually and as a church. That God will be with you if you're a man of God and walk with Him. And God will be with us if we are a group of us walking together as the brothers and mothers and sisters of Jesus. A couple more thoughts and I'll close it. In Isaiah 54, verse 17, it says, no weapon forged against you will prevail. No weapon forged against you will prevail. Can you imagine that all the plots of the evil one and the evil, and no weapon can prevail, no weapon forged against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and this is their vindication from me, declares the Lord. So this is the portion of the people of God. No weapon ever going to be able to harm them. Why? Because God will watch over them. How can you harm somebody if God is their guard? How can you hurt somebody if God is their bodyguard and his angels are watching over them? They've encamped around them. In the New Testament, the concept comes in. Paul puts it and says, we know, this is Romans chapter 8, verse 28, and we know in all things work together for good to those who love God. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. When you're walking with God, there's no such thing. Evil can never be part of the conversation. In all things, God is going to work for the good of those who love God. Even though somebody may try to harm you, and God may allow them to inflict whatever that harm that they want to put on you, but God will twist it and turn it into good because he's watching over you, because he's with you. He's never going to leave us. He's never going to leave you. And again, in Hebrews 13, it says, verse 5 and 6, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I leave you, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence that the Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? What is God saying? He's never going to leave you. He's never going to forsake me. He's our helper. How can we be afraid? What can man or even evil angelic things can do to us? I'll summarize and close. What are we talking about? It's a great lesson that what God told Jacob is almost like universal. Genesis 28:15, I am with you. I'll watch over you wherever you go. I will not leave you until I've done what I've promised you. So you want to have God as your companion? And also many other verses in the New Testament, Jesus says the same thing one way or another. So it's not like anything I'm saying is new. But I'm just saying that if you choose to walk with God, if you make him your friend, if you make him your father, man, you just made the best friend in the world. All the promises that Jesus has promised us, we're still waiting for some of those promises to come true in our lives. God says, I will not leave you until I've done what I've promised you. So this is an encouragement. It starts with Jacob. He's our example, or it starts with actually Abraham. He's the father of faith. But really, Jacob doesn't have it unless it was passed down to him from Abraham. And how would Joseph gotten this kind of faith, where he sees that it was the hand of God that brought him to Egypt to save all these lives and to preserve the nation of Israel through his hand, through suffering, through some unorthodox way of God. And but you will not have any qualm with God. You will not. If you have a relationship with God, you ask him, Father, why? You allow something to happen, you will have your answer. It may take a while for you to settle with the answer, but you will have an answer. It may delay. In Joseph's case, it took a couple of decades. It took the same thing. It took a couple of decades for his father, Jacob, to get his answers. Why his son was killed by the wild animals. But nevertheless, when they are faced with the goodness of God, they have no more questions. God has sent me here. Jacob, when says, God tells him that go down to Egypt, I'll go with you and I'll come up with you. Jacob doesn't complain, doesn't bring grievance to God. Why did you let me suffer? Why did you let me know that he was alive? He has no grievances. He sees the goodness of God. And that's the God we serve. So again, my encouragement is to get close to God. Be intimate with God. Because he is with you. He will watch over you. He will never leave you until he brings all of the promises he has given. Until they're all, I will not leave you until I've done what I've promised you. Until he has done what he has promised.